Hey, welcome back, and this is going to be my thoughts, impressions and review of Resident Evil 7. Like my other video, I'll be starting off with a quick background of it, then going through the good points, followed by the bad points, and then ending on a summary and overall score. The footage playing in the background will be spoiler free because it's from the 2 demos that were released prior to the game. I'll just start off by saying that I am a huge Resident Evil fan, so when they revealed this at E3 I was absolutely mind blown and excited because I couldn't believe that the kitchen demo turned out to be Resident Evil 7. They did end up dropping a demo shortly after the press conference and I downloaded it straight away, and overall I was quite impressed by it, but I was still a bit sceptical with it being first person because the last time they did first person I weren't too impressed by it with the Survivor games. And when they announced that it was going to be fully playable in VR, I've got to say that it kind of swayed me to purchase a PSVR unit sooner than what I was expecting to, because if I were to play this game, it was definitely going to be in VR. After E3, I'm not too sure if there were much news coming out anyway, but I was just pretty much dodging everything to do with it. If there were any articles, I'd just totally ignore them, because I didn't want this spoiled at all. But then it was either at TGS, VGAs or PSX that they showed something new, which was the Lantern gameplay demo, I think it was called. I tried to not look at it because I was watching it live, but I did end up glancing over quite a bit and seeing certain parts, which is why when I was playing through it, that when I got to that part it reminded me of it. But still it left me quite skeptical about it because we'd seen so little of the game and it wasn't that far off release. To be honest, I was going to buy it day one anyway, regardless of what it was going to be like, because it cannot have been as bad as Resident Evil 6, because that was just garbage. And I did buy Resident Evil Revelations 2 day one as well, and I weren't that impressed by that, surprisingly. So in my books, it was going to be a step up either way. When reviews started to roll out as well, I had a quick look at all the scores, and I was really impressed that people were actually enjoying it and rating it so high. So good on Capcom for keeping everything under wraps for that long and secretive, because no one else seems to do that, and this really paid off for them. Just 2 things to note though before I move on. One is I played this entirely in VR, so some points that I bring up might only be related to VR, but I did end up going through it for a couple of hours afterwards, just standard, to see what it would be like, so I do have a pretty decent view overall of it. But obviously my view will be a bit different from other people's. And then finally, some of the things that I talk about in the good and bad points will contain spoilers. So if you want to click here, it'll take you directly to the end of the video with an overall summary of the game, which will be spoiler free. Right, so let's move on. Good points. VR works really well, and more so than what I was expecting it to. There are a few hiccups here and there, but for the most part it does work really good. Aiming is precise, where you look that is where you'll shoot. It does add extra depth to the game as well, obviously with it being in VR, like searching around for items is a lot more involving because you can move around and search underneath things, and it does seem to alter the pace as well because you'll be doing things a lot more slowly. I think they ended up nailing the setting really well because the locations where you visit, they're really different from each other, but they blend in perfectly. I think they ended up doing a really good job of the antagonists. The Baker family fit in so well, and I would like to see a bit more of them, so if we can get Jack in Marvel vs. Capcom, that'd be great. The Molder make really good standard enemies too. They fit in with the story, and they are a pretty big threat to begin with. There's a lot of things what you'd expect from a standard Resident Evil game what make their way into this one. So puzzles are back in. I would have liked to have seen a few more, but I was satisfied with the ones that were in. You've got your usual item management in this, which I've always enjoyed because then it stops you walking around with absolute everything. It's got collectibles in different forms which reward you, and it's done properly so they don't feel intrusive. Like most Resident Evil games, it encourages multiple playthroughs with unlockables. Like the originals, it does capture the atmosphere and does make it seem chilling and unsettling. And like with every mainline Resident Evil game, it's got to have save music, and this one has it too. Some other things that I really enjoyed were the different aspects of gameplay, one of which was stealth, because playing that in VR adds an entire new element to it. The combat is really engaging as well, and I found it to work really well in VR. Enemies do seem to react to where you shoot them, and you are rewarded for getting headshots because it will require less ammo to kill something. I did like the way the story came together as well, especially how you can piece things together by finding out the notes that are scattered throughout the game. My personal favourite part of the game though has got to be the videotapes. The way they implemented it seemed to fit so well, and they could do a lot of different things through it by telling different stories that happened in the past. It allowed them to experiment with different things, but also it allowed you to get a deeper feeling for the person that was involved in the tape. And it also served as a nice break from the main game. I do feel like it was a perfect length as well. I think it took me about 10 hours, which I believe is a bit longer than other people, but I played it a lot slower because I was playing it in VR. And gotta say, love them references and tie-ins to previous Resi games. And now on to the bad points about it. First was the enemies, specifically the moulded. It's not that I have a problem with them, I just feel there weren't enough designs of them. It just ended up feeling a bit too samey. And while I'm still talking about enemies, I'll have to bring in the bosses. I do love the bosses, I do think they were great. The only problems I have with them was the final form of Jack when you fight him. I thought the final form of Jack was just a bit too big and ridiculous looking, that it was hard to take it serious. And then at the end with the final boss, that just looked like a giant mess. Normal sized Jack and mutated Marguerite, totally cool with. These, no. I do feel like the red tinge across the screen when you lost some health come on far too easy. Like if you got hit once, it seemed to appear there, even though your health was still green. The only way to get rid of it, I believe, was if you was at max health, but if you lost any health, it appeared, which I think it just appeared a bit too early. If you were yellow, fair enough, but not green. This is not really a bad point, this is more of a personal preference, but I do wish there were a couple more videotapes in the game. I just feel like there weren't enough because I enjoyed them that much. I know there are DLC ones, which I will end up getting at some point, but I feel maybe 2 or 3 more would have been spot on for me. Now these problems will only be VR related. So first off, we'll start with motion sickness. Now this is something that I've never really had to deal with myself. The only time I have is when I was trying out the Oculus Dev Kit 1 with Half-Life 2. I was fine with all other games on it. When I tried the Oculus Dev Kit 2, that was totally fine. I was fine with everything. And when I've tried the Vive, I'm perfectly fine with anything else. The PSVR, when I got it, I got a couple of games and I was fine with them. Rush of Blood, well, Until Dawn and Rush of Blood, totally fine with. PSVR Worlds, fine with. Drive Club, fine with. But Resident Evil just seemed to, I don't know, it did make me feel sick for the first couple of parts that I was playing with this. I could last about 40 minutes and it really affected my head and eyes. After a while I did feel like I was getting used to it because I could last a hell of a lot longer than what I could before, and I had no issues whatsoever. So I do feel like it's something what you have to get used to, but it is a major thing to begin with. Which is a real shame as well, because when I first started it I didn't think I'd be able to make it through the entire game because the motion sickness was putting me off. Visuals are quite a bit of a downgrade from the standard game, but that's to be expected with VR. I don't know what it's like on a standard PS4, but I was playing this on the Pro as well, so I think I got a bigger resolution boost. With the downgrade, there are certain things that seem to take you out of the experience. Some examples of this are plants, because you can tell they're just planes and they look really flat and there's no volume to them. And then another part is insects, because there's a specific part where you're going around the back of a wall and there's some centipedes or millipedes on the wall, but the frame rate they're running at is really strange and they look flat, that it just looks so strange compared to everything else and it just takes you out of it. Another problem what I had, which, excuse the pun, disconnected me, was the fact that your arms are floating and they're not connected to your body, and it just looks really, really strange. And then one really jarring thing is the transition from gameplay to a cutscene, because obviously in the VR headset you can control the way, well, however you look, but when it transitions to a cutscene, it's just like this static video, this rectangular video, what you can't look around, and it's just a bit jarring when it happens. So we'll just move on to an overall summary of it. Overall, I think it's a bloody good game and I really enjoyed it. I think it's a return to form because of what happened with Resident Evil 6 and the sour taste it left in everyone's mouth that this is a really, really good step in the right direction. Everything about it was fresh, it offered a new way to play, it was an entirely new perspective, and I think they added some really cool new features. It's definitely got me wanting to replay it to unlock everything. It's got me excited for the DLC what's coming out, the free DLC in spring, which should be soon. I really cannot wait for that. And it's got me wanting to purchase the DLC that's out already, because it seems like there's some really good things with that, but I'm just not willing to drop 25 quid on it, so I'll wait for that to go on sale and then I'll pick it up. I do think VR was a very good decision to do, and I'm really glad that I ended up playing it as a first time playthrough in VR, because when you don't know what's about to happen or what's through the door, it adds real extra tension onto it. I do feel like everyone should probably play this because it does offer something completely different to previous games. Especially if you've got VR and you can get over the motion sickness hurdle, it's totally worth it. Overall, it has got me really excited for the future of it and to see what they do with it next. Great return to form, great Resident Evil game, and easily one of the best what we've had for quite a while. Cheers for watching, hopefully it helps at least one person out, and we'll see what the next one brings.
Welcome to the family, son.